Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Rainmakers Roundup. I'm your host, Mark Iorio, and today I've got Rich McLaughlin with me. Rich is the owner of McLaughlin Consulting Services and also an EOS Implementer. Great to have you on the program.
Great to be here, Mark. Thanks.
Thanks, Rich. Hey, Rich, you know, there are a lot of EOS Implementers out there, and that's a system. That is a process. It's the entrepreneur's operating system, right?
Right.
EOS. But leading up to that, over the years, you've had a lot of experience in management and working for some large companies, including Anderson Wright Consulting, which later became Accenture. What's prepared you to get to the spot you're at now?
Wow. I'd probably have to just say, just that firsthand experience. I mean, at Anderson specifically, they push you out there quickly and get you into the client's organization, and you know you're running projects fairly early in your career. So, you know, you had to kind of really figure it out pretty quickly.
It's baptism by fire.
Baptism by fire. So that was great. It was scary to a certain degree, but great. And then just my other kind of corporate travels got to learn about TQM at one stop, and then kind of leadership development at another stop. So it was it wasn't by design really. I mean, I just kind of fell into it, so to speak, but it was a great rounding of kind of different things that ultimately go into what I would call building a sustainable culture. So
when you worked for Square D, which is a big company, that was a great organization. I mean, I always loved manufacturing facilities, Rich, because they taught you everything. If you didn't go to MBA school or you didn't have the opportunity to get your master's in something, especially management, working for an organization like Square D had to be such a great feather in your cap, right? And then that TQM, a lot of people don't know what that is. I mean, because when you and I were growing up and we went, you know, we were in our first couple jobs, total quality management came out of Japan. It was the beginnings of like the ISO certification process, but it was just-in-time inventory, and it made us think more efficiently and effectively about the way we did things, right?
Correct, absolutely. In fact, Demings went over there. And
exactly.
He had no audience here in the States, so he took it to Japan, and he found a willing audience. So. Yeah, and to me, I mentioned in I think one of our other conversations, it taught me a lot about process and having a process mindset. It got to the point you can appreciate when I would go to one of the Square D plants, and they'd always want to give you a plant tour. And you know, it often would start with wherever you were. And well, here we're in finance over here, and I'm like, no. I said, take me to receiving, start there, and take me through the plant the way raw material goes through the plant. Because I very quickly kind of really understood the pain points and the possible snafus and all the kind of, by going through the plant tour in the way raw material is received to product coming out the other end.
You know, when you mentioned process, and when, I don't know about you, but when I was younger, and you know, I worked for a division of GTE Sylvania, so I was in the wiring device division, similar to Square D. I mean, we bought Square D products and so on, but process to me was like a foreign, you know, it was a foreign word. You know, we did things, the way I did things and the way I learned things was you wing it, you know, kind of get it done, you know, you get things done because, you know, you got this sense of urgency. When you finally understand what it's like to put a process in place, it works. And it's tried and true. And that's what EOS does, right? So talk a little bit about that.
So as you can imagine, even in big companies, if we're in the weeds and we're just doing the work, we get so busy just kind of running things the way we've been running them that we rarely step back and ask, does this make sense? Is there a better way? And that's what I would call, when you do that step back, you're working on the business now, because you're stepping back and saying, wait a minute, let's rethink this. So let's work on the business to make it a little bit, so we're not just doing the same craziness every day. So that's part of that process mindset, and yes, EOS is very much helping the client step back a little bit and look at, does this make sense for our business given where we're trying to go?
So let's assume you find a new prospect and they're ready to sign on. Take us through the process for EOS. How do you start? What's the onboarding like?
Yeah.
You know, and what I mean by that, I don't mean like when we get I mean the early onboarding. Like, what do we do first?
Right, right. So it all starts with what we call our 90-minute deep dive, where we just, before we even start contracting with them to do the real work, we just want to say, here's what we do, and we want you to understand what we're going to be looking at and having you work on if we come in and start working with you. And we give away the 90 in the spirit of, we're going to share with you kind of our way of working, some of the tools, et cetera, so that you know what you're walking into. Because if you're kind of okay with how things are going, and you just want to, you know, you're comfortable with your maybe 3 to 5% growth, and that's okay for you, you may not want us, because we're going to push you to take it up a notch.
Right.
And some clients don't, because they're comfortable with that kind of growth.
Yep.
So we give that away, and then if they say, yes, we want to do this, then we start with, all right, we have 3 what we call education days, where we're introducing the tools and the process, but we try to do it in a graduated way, so we're not fire hosing them with everything right up the bat.
Sure.
So for every 30 days, we're coming in and just getting them introduced to the tools and the process. But after that 3 days of education, training, introduction of tools, then we move into just quarterly touch points, where we're just coming in to say, how's things going? What do we need to tweak? What's working? What isn't working? Fine tuning the process.
Okay. When you go through that, how do you know whether or not, you know, we talked a little bit about this before the show, and you know, oftentimes you get some resistance from people. How do you ferret that out? What's the process of? I'm not suggesting letting them walk through the front or back door to leave, but how do you ferret out people that are not really on board?
Yeah. Great question, because almost inevitably there's probably at least one person who's maybe a little bit more skeptical than the others.
Yeah.
Or maybe a little bit more controlling than the others, and doesn't want to necessarily fully engage. And so we talk a lot about the leadership team, because that's where it starts, that they have to be open and honest with each other and transparent. And let me give you an example. Let's say the owner wants to have a side conversation with me. I need to be able to tell the owner, whatever we talk about ultimately needs to be brought up with the team if it's something that's impacting the team. So you got to be okay with me saying, bringing this to the team and saying, how are we going to resolve this? Yeah. Because if we start those one-off conversations and everybody wants me to, no, don't tell anybody, we're off on the bad foot.
We're going to get off on the bad foot, on the wrong foot. Yeah. Talk to us about, I don't know if a lot of people understand, this came out of a book that Gino Wickman wrote called Traction, right? And there's implementers out there. How did you come about becoming an EOS implementer? What was that process like? Sure.
So the short answer is, a friend of mine who we both do leadership development work for larger corporations.
Okay.
He jumped in about 4 years ago and told me about it at the time, but at the time it just wasn't registering with me.
Yeah.
Then about a year ago, I reconnected with him and I said, tell me a little bit more. And then when I kind of saw the model, it just made sense to me, because in a lot of cases, I was doing a number of things within the model that with my current clients, but there were some pieces I was not, and this kind of brought it all together. It reminded me of Covey's 7 Habits model, where the model's not that complicated. Living up to it every day is not easy.
Oh my gosh, sure, it sure is.
But it's the same kind of thing, I think, because the model's not complicated, but the discipline is the hard part.
Yeah.
But it made sense to me, and I love the simplicity of it. I love the idea that they don't need thousands of tools. They just need a few set of tools to kind of make it simple enough to implement. And I love that about the model and the way we do our work. So I just kind of said, I'm jumping in, because this makes sense to me.
What were you doing with the leadership consulting practice, and when you went in, and how did you find clients with that as opposed to finding clients with EOS?
Well, so in the leadership development stuff, a lot of it came from referrals, because I was doing that internally at some of these big companies I was working with.
Yeah.
And they found that they liked my facilitation style, because I like to say, at the end of the day, that's my sweet spot. That's my strength.
Yeah.
So a lot of it came through referrals, but when I'm trying to find new clients in that space, very similar to EOS, it takes a while. It's a long lead time to when you start a conversation to when it actually leads to paying work. And And I have to remind myself of that periodically because sometimes I get a little impatient.
Yeah, of course. We all do. We all do. It's you know, even what I do is a long selling process, and it's tedious, but you've got to be patient with it.
Yeah.
So as you're going through this process with a new client, onboarding a new client, what are some of you mentioned a few tools, right? So what are some of the tools that you use and want to have implemented in an organization?
So two of the probably early ones that we introduced that are the most eye-opening often is one we call the accountability chart, where we kind of lay out all the roles that we know we need in here to be filled with the right person based on what the role needs versus what the person who's currently in that role brings.
Okay.
And that's often eye-opening because oftentimes they want to fit the role to what the person brings, and they say, no, we got to define what the role is that we need here.
Yep.
And then figure out, is that the right person in that role?
Okay.
And that's one.
And so that's a lot like fielding a baseball team, right? So you need a shortstop. The shortstop's got to have good range, has to have a good arm, has to have good leadership skills, can turn a double play, can get in the hole, and so on, right?
Absolutely.
That's the kind of thing you're talking about with the accountability chart.
Yes.
What's the other one, real quick, and then we're going to take a quick break.
So the people analyzer is probably the other one, and that is where we ask two questions. We ask, is this the right person for our organization from a culture fit?
Okay.
So do they fit our core values? And we want them to be serious about clarifying what those core values are and making them behavioral so that we can say, yes, this person shows up every day living up to these values.
Got it.
And then are they in the right seat, which gets back to that.
Yeah.
And there's three things we ask there. Do they get it conceptually? Do they want it? And can they do it?
Yeah.
And they have to hit all three of those to be the right person.
Yeah, cool. After the break, we're going to talk about core values and how you get to that spot. But folks, don't go away. We've got more with Rich McLaughlin after this message from the Kessler Foundation, who sponsored our program here. We're grateful for that. Kessler is helping people with disabilities through the rehabilitation and center, and also the research that they're doing on spinal cord injury and traumatic brain injury. So we thank them for that. We'll be right back with more from Rich McLaughlin after this message from our Kesslers. Thank you.
Big Flamingo Insurance, what do you want?
Yeah, can we get the auto insurance policy?
Anything else?
Can we add an extra driver?
Number 4 combo, your premium comes with pickup spot 2.
Okay.
When it comes to insurance, you don't have to sacrifice service to save.
Wait, this isn't even the right policy.
Upgrade to NJM and get the 5-star customer service you deserve with discounts you'll love.
Excuse me, Mr. Rollerbird?
No jingles or mascots, just great insurance. NJM. Get a quote today.
You can be confident choosing Farmers Insurance. There's no need to knock on wood.
Perfect.
This is an unnatural amount of natural light.
Thank you.
We are farmers. Bum, 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 bum.
Hey, Jake from State Farm. I want that personal price plan. So how's this for personal? I draw mustaches on players' faces when they're asleep.
Coach Reed, you don't need to get that personal to get the State Farm personal price plan. It helps you create an affordable price just for you.
Oh.
Coach, it happened again.
I'm gonna get to the bottom of this.
Call or click to get a quote today. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
She found it. The feeling of finding the psoriasis treatment she's been looking for. So Tic2 is the first of its kind once daily pill for moderate to severe plaque psoriasis for the chance at clear or almost clear skin. It's like the feeling of finding that outfit psoriasis tried to hide from you.
Welcome back to Rainmakers Roundup. I'm your host, Mark Iorio, and I've got Rich McLaughlin with me. And Rich is not only the owner of McLaughlin Consulting Services, but he is an EOS implementer, and EOS is Entrepreneur's Operating System, put out by Gino Wickman and his crew at started with Traction. Let's, thanks. I mean, this has been great. I enjoy this because, you're helping organizations become better at what they do. You mentioned growth earlier. A lot of times, people they're satisfied with a 3 to 5%, 6% growth year over year, Rich.
Yeah.
They don't want to rock the boat. Change is tough.
Sure.
I mean, Behavioral change is even more difficult. Like you mentioned Covey earlier. You know, when you look at the 7 habits and you look at, first of all, your personal constitution, who you are as a person.
Right.
And then you look at all those areas of your life and try to set goals for each of those areas. Do you do that every day?
I wish I did. I mean, I'm not that disciplined. Yeah,
you try. I try.
Sure.
But, you know, setting spiritual goals and physical goals and mental goals and family goals and financial goals, and, you know, it's very, very difficult. So when you talk to people at the senior level, at a leadership level, when you're about to implement EOS, when you talk about core values, what is that process like?
So one of the things that we try to communicate is that core values are not something that you go get from somebody else. Like you kind of read somebody else's core value. Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
It's got to come from within, meaning they got to personally resonate with it. It's just part of who they are. And so my job is to try to pull that out of them. And that is, you shouldn't need to go elsewhere to figure out what your core values are.
Right.
What do you stand for? Why'd you start this company? And what was important to you when you started this company?
Right.
And try to get them to articulate that in a behavioral way.
Right.
And then tell a story ultimately that they can then tell new hires when they come in. This is what you got to understand about working here.
Right.
And so when they can do that, we've done the core values work.
Yeah.
But some folks are, you know, it takes them a while to kind of get that connection.
Yeah, well, taking the values of the organization, in other words, their behaviors, right, and translating that into something that's you can implement,
right,
day by day. So behavioral. Here's the behaviors. In other words, here are our commandments. We call them aligned inspirations in our business, but we can call them commandments, right? These are how we behave.
Right.
But now, how do you follow that? It's right. How do you follow that day by day? And you know, not to get too deeply into faith, but it's very similar, right?
Yeah.
The teachings of God, Christ, whatever. You read the Bible and you say to yourself, I'm going to try as best I can to live this life.
Right.
Now, you fall short sometimes.
Sure.
And so how those things are sometimes you self-correct, but sometimes you have colleagues that point out the fact that that's not our behavior. How do you handle that?
That's a great question. I mean, I think one of the things we'll tell the leadership team is if you go down this path and you're going to articulate some core values and with the behaviors that we want to see from folks, you got to be ready for those moments when somebody's not doing it.
Yeah.
And because others are going to point it out in varying ways. They're going to let you know that Joe or Sarah or whatever, put a name there, they're not owning up to what they said they're going to own up to in terms of their behavior. So then that becomes an important moment for the leadership team, for somebody to have that hard conversation with them about that.
Yeah.
And they ultimately may need to go. And that's part of what we're telling them.
Do you approach it? Do you approach it by asking whether or not that behavior is in alignment with who we are, or it's not an admonishment of the person and their behavior, but isn't it more about, hey, Rich, is what you just did in alignment with our core values, right?
Yeah.
And the person takes it a little bit differently if they're approached that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, think of the core values as ideals, right? I mean, and we're all going to fall short on certain days, maybe. Similar to the Covey stuff, where I sometimes I'm pretty good at hewing to those principles. Sometimes I'm less good. I think the same thing here with the core values. I think the thing is, when people around the company see somebody consistently kind of ignore something that everybody else is trying to live up to, that's going to show, and it's going to start to rub people the wrong way, and they're going to start going, why should I continue to do this when we're letting such and such get away with it?
Yeah, exactly.
And you got to address that, because if not, your credibility starts to take a hit.
Of course.
And the trust starts to go out the window.
Yeah, I mean, I ran a business for a long time, 35 and then 85 people as it grew. And I had people, actually it was a relative of mine who I let get away with so much for so long. And people were looking at me like, and I looked at myself a lot of times, Rich, where I said, why can't I do something about him?
Yeah.
And when I finally was able to do it, it was a relief for me, but then he blamed me for all, the shortcomings. So you have to, there's a fellow that always said, a clean cut heals the fastest.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's necessary.
Yes.
If you think back, Accenture or Arthur Andersen, Square D, the other experiences that you've had, would you do anything, if you had to wave a magic wand, would you do anything different, or do you feel pretty comfortable with where you are or what you've done?
There's always some regret of some sort where you kind of think, if I went this way instead of that way, would things be different? I don't spend a lot of time, haggling over that or dwelling on that because it's just not productive. I like to do, and maybe this is why I ended up gravitating to EOS, because I like to kind of look at the whole thing. I like to look at the whole system. And not just HR or not just finance or whatever. Look at the whole thing and see, how is this working together? Because of that, I ended up working with different companies and going to trying out different things. And that kind of rounded out my worldview, I guess, and helped me, I think. But to others outside looking in might be like, well, Rich, you should really pick a lane. And I'm like, yeah, but I like all the different aspects. So. Right or wrong, I don't know, but it seems to be working.
Yeah, when you, especially when you work for a manufacturing organization like Square D, you get to see all those things. Like when you said, take me for a tour, I want to start in receiving, you touch, receiving touches everything. Right? Purchasing, finance, inventory, production, everything, right? Operations. So it's really a good, I like the well-roundedness. I really do, Rich, because then you can look at the whole picture and say, there's areas of this business that I think, look, I'm not experts in everywhere, in every spot, like you're not, right?
Correct.
But you can identify those areas and then help focus on those KPIs that are really important, right? Yeah. So, advice to a younger person, a younger Rich McLaughlin, or a person coming up in the ranks trying to do what you're doing, either with leadership or helping organizations grow and thrive. What would you tell them?
Well, at the end of the day, I'd say, I was lucky I had two parents who I think were both very principled people, and they raised me in a principled way. Sometimes I hated it, but I'm glad they did at the end of the day.
Of course.
And so, probably the biggest thing I learned was to trust my instincts. And if I didn't feel I was in the right role or the right situation, or I had a funny relationship with the boss, I learned over time to trust my instincts, and that instead of looking around for somebody to give me the right answer. And own them. So own your decisions at the end of the day, and know that, in this day and age, the whole idea of going and working at one place for your career is just, nobody believes that anymore, I don't believe. You might work at 6 different places. So you have to be flexible, you have to learn to play well with others, and also know what you're okay with and what you're not okay with. So be clear about what your values are, so that, if you're in a situation where something's not right, trust your instincts.
Yeah, that's great. That's good advice. A lot of times, when you're younger, you second guess yourself because you're not really sure of yourself. And a lot of times, Rich, who helps with that are mentors, people that are a little bit more seasoned, have a little bit more experience. I'm sure you've had fortunate times where you've had people in your life like that have been mentors to you, right? So that's really important, and I think it helps when you have that empathetic ear when you're sitting down with a leader of an organization about to implement EOS or leadership training or whatever it is. You just have that, that feeling that we're people too, man. We just have to figure this thing out together, and I'm here to help you. Right.
Absolutely.
How about as far as people that have inspired you in life? Where does that all come from, Rich?
So I mentioned my parents, of course, and lucky to have them. Right now, I'd say, the two things that kind of keep me showing up every day, if you want to say it that way, is my two sons. I've been a single dad for a while now, and so they're counting on Dad to kind of continue to show up.
Absolutely.
And then,
how old are the boys?
24 and 20.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So, I think I did okay. We'll see.
Good. I'm sure you did.
But the other one is when I started my business, when I started my McLaughlin Consulting, I just at that time happened to come across a George Bernard Shaw quote that just stuck with me. And it was a passage, it's an excerpt from a longer passage where I think he was talking about his personal mission or his purpose. And I'll paraphrase, but he says some things along the lines of, that he says, life is no brief candle for me. It's sort of a splendid torch, which I got a hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it off to future generations.
That's great.
And I was like, oof.
Yeah.
That's his clarion call is basically saying, show up every day.
Every day, yeah.
And that stuck with me, and it's been and so in an earlier version of my business, it was actually called the McLaughlin Community because of that reference to community.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Rich, thanks.
Yeah,
I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, great.
Tell everyone how to get in touch with you, please.
So the simplest way would be reach out to me at my EOS email, rich.mclaughlin@eosworldwide.com, or you can cell phone 609-577-3072.
And LinkedIn?
LinkedIn, yes, it should be under Rich McLaughlin. Just look for the guy with the shaved dome, and you should be able to find me okay.
Thanks, Rich.
All right, Mark.
I really appreciate it. It was a
problem.
great conversation. All right, folks, that's a wrap for Rainmakers Roundup. Check Rich out. He's on LinkedIn. I guess you can go to the EOS website too, right? And,
yes.
And find you under the many hundreds of implementers there.
Yeah.
But Rich is in Mercer County, so New Jersey. So look him up, check him out there. Thanks for joining us, folks. We'll see you next time. Have a wonderful and safe week.